You're just too emotional for leadership, Maya. It wouldn't be fair to reward that with a raise. The words sliced through me like a blade, their sting far more potent than Emma Langford could ever understand. I had replayed that moment in my head over and over for weeks, feeling the anger coil tighter in my chest each time. And now, as I stood in front of the entire company, all eyes on me, I was ready. I had waited for this opportunity. The quarterly all-staff meeting where Emma, my boss, relished the chance to bask in the company's admiration. This time she wouldn't be the one controlling the narrative. The conference room was packed with over 100 employees filling every chair, some even standing at the back. The large oval table in the center was reserved for senior management, where Emma sat in her usual position at the head, flanked by executives who had blindly trusted her leadership for years. I could feel the tension in the air as I stepped forward. People knew something was about to happen. They had seen the way I carried myself since that fateful conversation with Emma. I had been quieter, more observant, yet resolute. And now, with the evidence I had meticulously gathered, I was about to make sure that Emma Langford was held accountable for every lie, every stolen credit, and every unfair decision she had made under the guise of leadership. Taking a deep breath, I met Emma's gaze. Her lips were pressed into a tight line, her manicured fingers wrapped around the pen she had been twirling absent-mindedly a moment ago. She knew something was coming, she just didn't know what. I turned to face the room, my voice steady but firm. I think it's time we talk about honesty, accountability, and fairness. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. People shifted in their seats, glancing at each other, then at Emma, whose expression remained neutral, though I could see the subtle shift in her posture. She was bracing herself. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable, to ensure that every single person in the room was paying attention. For the past year, I continued, I've been told that my work was excellent, that I was an asset to this company, that I was indispensable. Yet when I asked for a raise, I was told I was too emotional for leadership. A few sharp intakes of breath echoed through the room. Some people exchanged incredulous looks. Others turned to Emma, waiting for her reaction. I turned my attention back to her. Would you like to explain that? Emma's expression didn't falter, but I noticed the way she tensed slightly. She let out a soft chuckle, an attempt to appear unfazed. Maya, this really isn't the time or place for, isn't it? I cut in smoothly. This meeting is about company performance and leadership. What better time? She shifted in her seat. If you had concerns, you could have spoken to me privately. I did, I said calmly. And you dismissed me. So now I'm making sure everyone hears the truth. The murmur in the room grew louder. Employees at the back leaned forward, eager to catch every word. Emma's jaw clenched. I don't see how this is productive. Oh, I think it's very productive. I picked up the folder I had placed on the table in front of me. In fact, I think everyone here deserves to know exactly what kind of leadership we've been working under. I flipped open the first page and held it up. This, I said, is an email thread from the Halvorsen Tech project. A few employees sat up straighter at the mention of Halvorsen. It had been our biggest deal of the year, the one that had secured the company's highest revenue projections. Everyone knew how crucial it had been. Emma's fingers twitched. I could see the effort she was making to keep her expression blank. I read aloud. Maya, can you finalize the proposal? I don't have time to review, but I trust you to make it perfect. The words hung in the air like a slap. I turned the page. And this, I held up another document, is the final approval from Halvorsen Tech addressed directly to me. Silence. A heavy, uncomfortable silence that made even the senior executives look uncertain. I picked up the printed company press release. Yet, according to this official announcement, the person who led negotiations, who secured the deal, who made it happen, was Emma Langford. A sharp gasp broke the silence. I set the paper down with deliberate slowness, then turned back to Emma. Would you like to explain that? Emma's face had lost its usual confident glow. She looked cornered, exposed. I was just trying to represent the team as a whole, she stammered. It wasn't about taking credit for my work. I finished for her. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. But no one spoke. No one moved. And then the most ironic thing happened. Her voice wavered. Her breathing hitched. Her eyes glistened as she tried to keep her composure. She was on the verge of tears. I tilted my head slightly, watching the cracks form in her perfect, untouchable image. Then in a calm, measured voice I said, "You seem emotional, Emma." The moment the words left my mouth, the weight of them sank into the room. Emma let out a shaky breath, blinking rapidly. The same woman who had dismissed my hard work, who had called me too emotional for leadership, was now sitting in front of the entire company, visibly unraveling. The silence in the room stretched unbearably, thick with tension. People glanced at each other, waiting, watching. Emma turned away as if willing herself to hold it together. But she couldn't. And then it happened. A single tear escaped down her cheek. She wiped at it quickly, but it was too late. She had broken. And everyone saw it. Emma Langford, the fearless, unshakable director of operations, had just shed a tear in front of the entire company. The silence that followed was suffocating. Every single person in the conference room, executives, managers, interns, had seen it happen. And they weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at her. I could see the panic in Emma's eyes, the way she struggled to compose herself, but she had already lost control of the room. It was the exact moment when the power dynamic shifted, when people who had blindly followed her began to question. I could have stopped there. I could have walked away knowing I had made my point. But I wasn't finished yet. I stepped closer to the table, placing my hands on the smooth wooden surface as I leaned forward slightly. For months, I've been told that emotions have no place in leadership. That logic and control matter more than fairness and honesty. And yet, I gestured toward Emma, who was still gripping her pen as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. When faced with the truth, even the most composed leaders crack. Emma inhaled sharply, forcing herself upright. "This is unprofessional," she snapped, her voice trembling just slightly. "Unprofessional." I let out a soft laugh. "You stole credit for my work, refused to acknowledge my contributions, and when I asked for a raise, you called me too emotional. You made it personal, Emma." "Not me." I turned to the room, scanning the faces of my colleagues. Many of them had been in similar positions. Overworked, undervalued, dismissed. Some looked uncomfortable, while others looked relieved, as if they had been waiting for someone to say what they had been thinking for years. "Let's talk about professionalism," I continued, flipping to another page in my folder. "How about this email from 3 months ago? The one where Emma instructed my team to redo an entire presentation the night before a major client pitch because she forgot to submit the right version." A few people exchanged knowing looks. I turned to another document. Or this expense report, where Emma approved a business trip to Dubai for herself, without any legitimate company purpose, while rejecting my request for software updates that would have improved efficiency. The murmurs grew louder. A few managers at the table glanced at one another, unease creeping into their expressions. The executives, usually detached from office drama, were now shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Emma's face turned pale. "That's enough." I met her eyes. "Is it?" Her jaw clenched. "You have no idea what you're doing." I straightened, exuding the confidence I knew she wanted to crush. "Actually, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm showing everyone who you really are." Emma's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned toward the CEO, Mr. Hughes, who had been silent up until now, observing the chaos unfolding before him. "Sir," she began, her voice carefully controlled, "I don't think this is the time to entertain baseless accusations." "Are they baseless?" Mr. Hughes finally spoke, his voice calm but sharp. Emma hesitated, clearly not expecting him to question her. He turned his gaze to me. "Maya, you seem prepared. Do you have more to share?" The room fell into a hush. Emma's fingers dug into the armrests of her chair. I nodded. "Sir, I do." And with that, I pulled out the final piece of evidence. One that would make sure Emma Langford would never dismiss me or anyone else again. It was the beginning of the end for her. If I had learned one thing from working under Emma Langford, it was that power wasn't always about position. It was about perception. She had built her career on the illusion of being an exceptional leader, strategic, composed, and irreplaceable. My plan wasn't just to expose her. It was to shatter that illusion. I hadn't made my move lightly. The moment Emma told me I was too emotional for a raise, I knew I couldn't just argue my way out of it. She thrived on gaslighting people, twisting conversations until they doubted their own memories. If I wanted to bring her down, I needed proof. So, I started documenting everything. I saved emails where she offloaded her work onto me and took credit for it later. I compiled reports showing how she made reckless financial decisions while denying necessary resources to the team. I gathered testimonies from colleagues who had also been dismissed, belittled, or overlooked by her. Most importantly, I found something I hadn't even been searching for: evidence of her manipulating company performance metrics. In an attempt to secure a promotion for herself, Emma had been altering financial reports to make it look like the company was outperforming its actual numbers. She was inflating revenue projections, underreporting expenses, and shifting costs onto different budgets to create the illusion of growth. It was fraud. And it was my golden ticket. I knew I couldn't just go to HR with my findings. Emma was well connected. She had allies in senior management who would bury my accusations before they ever reached the CEO's desk. I needed an audience. The quarterly all-staff meeting was perfect. It was the one time when the entire company, including the executive board, was gathered in one room. Emma wouldn't be able to escape or shut me down without making a scene. More importantly, it was a setting where the optics mattered. If Emma reacted poorly, it would be a public disaster for her. So I waited. I kept my head down, pretending to accept my rejection quietly while ensuring that every piece of evidence was airtight. Then, as the meeting approached, I made my final move. 2 days before the all-staff meeting, I, accidentally, let it slip to one of Emma's closest allies, our finance director Mark, that I had been looking into company reports. I framed it as casual curiosity, pretending to be unsure about some discrepancies I had found. Mark wasn't stupid. He knew if I dug too deep I'd find the truth. And that meant Emma knew too. That night I received an email from Emma. "Maya, let's meet tomorrow morning to discuss your concerns. No need to involve anyone else. I'd like to clear up any confusion directly with you." It was exactly what I had expected. He was panicking. Emma didn't like surprises. She wanted control. And she knew I had something. But I wasn't walking into her trap. I responded politely, saying I appreciated the offer but was too busy preparing for the all-staff meeting. That way she knew whatever I had wasn't staying between us. She didn't reply. I could only imagine the sleepless night she had, wondering what was coming. And that was exactly what I wanted. By the time I stepped into the conference room for the meeting, I wasn't just prepared. I was in control. Emma just didn't know it yet. The morning of the all-staff meeting, I arrived early. Not because I was nervous, but because I wanted a front-row seat to Emma Langford's downfall. She had built her career on deception, wielding power through intimidation and manipulation. But today she wasn't the one in control. I was. The conference room buzzed with conversation as employees trickled in. Some were here to present their quarterly reports, others simply there to listen, but I could feel an undercurrent of tension in the air. Emma sat at the head of the long table, her expression a perfect mask of authority, but her fingers tapped lightly against the table, a telltale sign of unease. She knew something was coming. Mr. Hughes, the CEO, entered last. He took his seat at the center, glancing at the agenda. The meeting began as usual, with department heads running through key metrics and future goals. I stayed quiet, waiting. When it was finally Emma's turn to speak, she rose smoothly, her voice crisp and controlled as she launched into a polished speech about the company's financial growth and upcoming initiatives. "As you can see," she concluded, clicking to her final slide, "we've exceeded our quarterly targets. This puts us in an excellent position for the next phase of our expansion." Polite applause followed. She smiled, clearly regaining some of her confidence. And then Mr. Hughes turned to me. "Maya, I believe you requested a few minutes to discuss something?" This was it. I stood, making my way to the front of the room, feeling dozens of eyes on me. Emma's smile faltered ever so slightly. I set my folder down on the table and took a breath. "Thank you, Mr. Hughes. I do have something to share, something that I believe concerns all of us." I turned to the screen and pulled up my first slide. "This," I said, "is the revenue report that was sent to our investors last quarter. A standard report showing impressive growth." I let the room absorb it before clicking to the next slide. "And this," I continued, "is the actual revenue we generated, based on internal financial records." A murmur spread through the room as people noticed the glaring discrepancies. Emma stiffened in her seat. I'm not sure what you're trying to imply, Maya, but... I clicked again. A side-by-side comparison of the doctored reports appeared. What I'm implying, I said, locking eyes with her, is that these numbers were altered. Expenses were moved around, revenue was exaggerated, and costs were disguised to make it look like we were performing better than we actually were. Emma's mouth opened, then shut. And it doesn't stop there. I pulled up another slide. Here are expense approvals for software upgrades that were denied due to budget constraints, while at the same time, unnecessary executive travel was approved, including a $15,000 luxury retreat that was filed under training and development. A ripple of unease moved through the executives. Emma straightened. These are serious allegations and I don't appreciate being blindsided. I gave you a chance to talk, I cut in. You ignored it. So I decided to bring this to the one place you couldn't dismiss me. Her face paled. I turned to Mr. Hughes. Sir, if you allow, I'd like to share testimonials from multiple employees who have experienced unfair treatment under Emma's leadership. I saw him glance at Emma, then back at me. Go ahead. Emma inhaled sharply. This is absurd. I clicked to the next slide. It contained direct quotes from employees. Some anonymous, others willing to put their names on record. Emma took credit for my work multiple times. When I confronted her, she said that's just how the corporate world works. I asked for more resources for my team. She told me to be creative, and then approved funding for her personal projects. When I brought up concerns about a policy that disproportionately affected lower-level employees, she called me too sensitive. The room was dead silent. Emma was visibly struggling to maintain her composure. This is an attack, she said, her voice shaking. Maya has clearly been holding a grudge. I clicked to the final slide. It was a recording. A recording of Emma's own voice. Women like Maya just don't have the right temperament for leadership. They always make things personal instead of focusing on the big picture. The breath left her body. I had recorded her during my performance review. The same review where she told me I was too emotional for a raise. The color drained from her face as the words played over the speakers. And just like that, her carefully crafted image shattered. For a moment no one spoke. Then Mr. Hughes stood. He adjusted his tie, then turned to Emma. I think we need to have a conversation. Privately. Emma swallowed hard. Sir, Now. His voice left no room for argument. Emma pushed back from the table and hurried out of the room, her entire body tense. The moment the door closed behind her, the entire room exhaled. I turned back to the rest of the staff, their expressions ranging from shock to admiration. Some of them, the ones who had suffered under Emma for years, were even smiling. And that's when I realized I had won. The moment Emma fled the conference room, the air shifted. The tension that had hung so thick over the meeting dissolved into murmurs, exchanged glances, and in some corners quiet laughter. 4 years, Emma Langford had ruled through fear, gaslighting employees, dismissing concerns, and consolidating power through manipulation. But today, in front of the entire company, her mask had slipped. And everyone had seen it. Immediate reactions. I sat down, my pulse still racing as Mr. Hughes turned toward me. Maya, would you stay back for a moment? The murmurs around the table quieted. I saw a few employees glance at me with what looked like newfound respect. Others seemed stunned, still processing what had just happened. As the meeting adjourned, people filed out, some whispering to each other, others patting me on the back as they passed. Damn, Mark, the finance director, muttered as he walked by. That was brutal. I wasn't sure if he meant that as praise or criticism, but I didn't care. Once the room was nearly empty, it was just me, Mr. Hughes, and a few remaining executives. He folded his hands on the table, studying me. You were holding on to that for a while, weren't you? I met his gaze steadily. Yes. He exhaled through his nose. Why didn't you come to me first? Because Emma had allies. I didn't need to say who. We both knew she had people in high places who would have buried my accusations before they saw the light of day. I had to make sure the truth was heard. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer. Then he leaned back in his chair. Emma's position is in jeopardy, to put it lightly. The board will need to review everything, but I don't see a scenario where she walks away from this unscathed. I kept my face neutral, but inside, a wave of relief washed over me. Finally. She's going to fight this, I said. Oh, no doubt, he agreed. But with the evidence you presented and the recording, she's done. The weight of it hit me fully then. Emma Langford, the woman who told me I was too emotional for leadership, had been exposed for who she really was. And I had been the one to do it. By the next morning, the fallout had already begun. An email from the board went out, stating that Emma had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation, which in corporate terms meant she's never coming back. Rumors flew through the office like wildfire. Some people claimed she had been escorted out of the building. Others said she had broken down in Hugh's office, crying and begging for a second chance. I didn't care which version was true. What mattered was that she was gone. Of course, Emma wasn't the type to go down quietly. A few days later, I received an email from her personal account. Subject: You think you've won? Maya. I hope you're enjoying yourself. But don't think for a second that this is over. You humiliated me and people like you never get away with it. You're still nothing in this company. Don't be surprised if you find yourself out of a job soon. I stared at the email, then deleted it without responding. Emma was grasping at straws. She had spent years weaponizing fear, but the truth was she had no real power anymore. No allies. No position. She was done. A week after the all-staff meeting, Mr. Hughes called me into his office. Emma's officially out, he said, wasting no time. She resigned this morning. Even though I had expected it, the confirmation still sent a rush of satisfaction through me. We're restructuring leadership, he continued, and that brings me to you. I raised an eyebrow. Me. We need someone who understands the inner workings of this company, he said. Someone who isn't afraid to stand up for what's right. He leaned forward. How would you feel about stepping into Emma's role? For a moment I could only stare. The very promotion I had been denied, the one Emma had insisted I wasn't emotionally fit for, was now being offered to me on a silver platter. I let out a slow breath, then smiled. I'd be honored. As I settled into my new role, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't be like Emma. I wouldn't lead through fear, manipulation, or deceit. Instead, I would build a workplace where employees were valued, where hard work was recognized, and where no one was ever told they were too emotional for success. And as I sat in the very office Emma used to occupy, I knew one thing for certain. I had won. 6 months later. The office looked different. Not physically. The walls were the same, the desks arranged in the usual way, but there was a new energy in the air. The fear that once loomed over everyone like a storm cloud had dissipated. Under my leadership, employees no longer hesitated to voice their concerns. They knew they would be heard. And more importantly, they knew they wouldn't be punished for it. Morale had improved significantly. Productivity had too. With Emma's toxic influence removed, people worked together rather than against each other. But the biggest change? Respect. People respected me, not because they feared me but because I had earned it. And that, to me, was the greatest victory of all. Emma's fate. Emma Langford didn't go quietly into the night. After her forced resignation, she tried everything to reclaim her reputation. She painted herself as the victim in interviews, claiming she had been set up by an envious subordinate. She wrote LinkedIn articles about the dangers of office politics, and even hinted at legal action. None of it worked. The industry saw through her. Word had spread about the financial fraud, the manipulations, the toxic leadership. No respectable company wanted her in a position of power again. The last I heard, she had taken a low-level consulting job, far removed from the executive suite she once commanded. It was a fitting end. Not the kind that involved handcuffs and courtroom trials, but the kind where the people she once belittled rose above her, while she faded into irrelevance. One of the strangest outcomes of the entire ordeal was how it changed my relationships in the company. I had always assumed I was alone in my struggles with Emma. But after her downfall, people began to open up to me. Mark, the finance director who had once hesitated to stand against her, invited me to lunch and admitted he had been silently rooting for me all along. Sarah from HR confessed that she had tried to challenge Emma's unethical policies multiple times but was always shut down. Even Lisa, Emma's former assistant, the one who had once seemed so loyal to her, stopped by my office one day. "You know," she said, shifting awkwardly, "I used to think you were reckless for going up against her. And now?" I asked. She smirked. Now I just think you're brave. That meant more to me than she knew. One evening, months after the company had stabilized under my leadership, I was going through my emails when I saw a name I hadn't expected to see again. Emma Langford. My stomach tightened slightly as I clicked on it. Subject: a final word. Maya. I suppose I should hate you for what you did to me. And for a while I did. But after months of fighting against a reputation I can't shake, I've realized something. You didn't destroy me. I destroyed myself. For years I thought power meant control. That leadership was about eliminating threats, not uplifting people. I thought that keeping my position meant silencing anyone who challenged me. I see now that I was wrong. You didn't just win, Maya. You were right. Don't expect an apology. I'm not there yet. But I will say this: whatever you do with that power you fought so hard for, don't become what I was. You're better than that, Emma. I stared at the email for a long time. It wasn't quite redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was acknowledgement. And that was more than I had ever expected. As I closed my laptop for the night, I thought about everything that had led me here. The humiliation of being told I was too emotional for a raise. The anger of watching Emma manipulate and deceive her way to the top. The risk of exposing her in front of the entire company. And now, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had made a difference. Not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by someone in power. I had proven that standing up for what's right mattered. That truth mattered. That people like Emma didn't always win in the end. And as I looked out over the office, an office that was now mine to lead, I smiled. Because I had won. And I had won the right way. Emma's downfall didn't just change my life. It reshaped the entire company. The toxic leadership culture that had flourished under her rule was dismantled piece by piece. Employees who had once walked on eggshells finally felt free to express their ideas, question decisions, and contribute meaningfully. One of the first changes I implemented was an open-door policy. No more silent suffering. No more gaslighting. If someone had a problem, they could come directly to me or HR without fear of retaliation. And for the first time in years, people actually believed it. The company saw massive improvements. Higher employee satisfaction, better retention rates, and an increase in productivity. Investors noticed. Clients noticed. And more importantly, I noticed. For the first time in my career, I felt like I was working in a place where I truly belonged. Of course, Emma didn't disappear overnight. In the months following her resignation, she made a few desperate attempts to claw her way back into relevance. She tried to sue the company for wrongful termination. That was shut down quickly. The evidence of her misconduct was overwhelming. She applied for high-level positions at various firms, but no one wanted to take the risk. Her name had become synonymous with workplace toxicity. Eventually, she settled into a small consulting firm, far from the executive power she once held. I heard from mutual connections that she had changed, that she had been humbled, that she wasn't the same person she used to be. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, I no longer cared. Her story was no longer my story. When Mr. Hughes first offered me Emma's position, I had hesitated. Not because I didn't want it, I did. But because I knew what leadership could do to a person. I had watched Emma's hunger for power turn her into a monster. And I refused to follow that path. So I accepted the promotion, but on my terms. I brought in a new leadership team, filled with people who actually cared about the company's success rather than their own egos. I made fairness and accountability the pillars of our work culture. And when it came time for the next round of promotions, I ensured that no one would ever hear the words, "too emotional," used as an excuse to hold them back again. 6 months into my new role, I received an email that made me pause. It was from a rival firm, one of the largest in the industry. They had heard about my leadership and wanted to poach me for an even higher position with a massive salary increase. The offer was tempting. But I turned it down. Not because I wasn't ambitious. Not because I didn't want to climb higher. But because I belonged here. I had built something worth staying for. One evening, I was sitting in my office reflecting on everything that had happened when I received a message from an old friend, my former mentor. She had left the company years ago, driven away by Emma's toxic leadership. Her message was simple. "I heard what you did. I'm proud of you." I sat back in my chair smiling. For so long I had fought for recognition, for validation, for proof that I was good enough. No. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I knew it. Looking back, I realized something. Emma had been wrong about me. I was emotional. But emotions weren't a weakness. They were my strength. My passion for fairness, my anger at injustice, my drive to create a better workplace. Those were the very things that had led me to victory. And that was the ultimate lesson. Leadership isn't about cold calculation. It isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about using them. Using passion to inspire. Using empathy to uplift. Using courage to challenge the status quo. I had spent years trying to prove my worth. Well, I owned it.